welcome to the Depth Dive. Today, we're going to be tackling one of the biggest political shockers in recent memory, Donald Trump's win over Kamala Harris in the 2024 presidential race. So we've got a mountain of news articles, opinion pieces, expert analyses.
A lot to unpack.
To dig through.
Sure.
Our goal, to figure out why this outcome was so unexpected and what it reveals about America today.
It's fascinating, because this wasn't just a sudden upset. I think a lot of the factors at play had been simmering beneath the surface for years. We're not just looking at one event, but the culmination of trends and undercurrents in American society.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our sources point to the economy as a major player. Get this. Almost half of voters told exit pollsters.
Wow.
They were worse off financially than 4 years ago.
Wow.
That's the highest level of economic discontent since the 2008 recession.
And that discontent, that created the perfect breeding ground for Trump's message. He positioned himself as the ultimate disruptor, promising to shake up the system and bring back prosperity. And what's intriguing is that this economic anxiety wasn't limited to one particular group. Trump actually increased his support among voters of color, gaining about a third of their votes. That's a significant shift that we need to explore further.
Definitely a sign that economic concerns can transcend traditional demographics. Now, another key factor in this election was the huge gender gap. I'm talking one of the largest ever seen
for sure.
In a presidential race.
It was quite remarkable. Harris won women by 11 points, while Trump won men by 5.
Wow.
That's a 16-point difference. And to truly grasp the significance of this gap, we need to look beyond the candidates themselves and examine the issues that resonated really small-fiddle-flirtily with each gender.
Our sources dig into that. For example, Harris heavily emphasized issues like reproductive rights, while Trump's campaign focused on mobilizing a specific group, younger men, many of whom were not traditional voters and perhaps less engaged in politics until now.
That's a crucial observation. This election wasn't just about winning over existing voters. It was also about activating new segments of the electorate. And in key swing states like Georgia and Pennsylvania, the gender gap was even more pronounced, highlighting its crucial role in Trump's victory.
So we've got economic worries and a massive gender gap influencing the political landscape.
For sure.
Now let's turn our attention to the challenges faced by the Harris campaign, separate from Trump's successes.
One of the most significant hurdles Harris faced was simply time. She only had about 100 days to assemble her campaign after Biden withdrew. That's an incredibly tight window to build a presidential campaign, especially against a seasoned incumbent like Trump.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It certainly was. That limited time, it undoubtedly hampered the campaign's ability to adapt quickly to Trump's maneuvers and connect with voters on the ground. But time wasn't the only challenge. There were also difficulties in solidifying a broad and diverse coalition.
Several sources mention that Harris faced challenges connecting with progressive voters and certain minority groups. For instance, her stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict, which some perceived as pro-Israel, seemed to cost her support among Arab American and Muslim voters.
That's a critical point. Building and maintaining a strong, diverse coalition is essential for any presidential candidate. Failing to do so can have a significant impact on the final results.
And on top of the time crunch and coalition issues, there were also some internal campaign missteps. Our sources highlight things like data analysis problems, a less effective response to Trump's advertising blitz, and even criticisms of Harris's TV presence compared to Trump's.
It appears there were several areas where the Harris campaign struggled to match the effectiveness of Trump's operation. In a tight race like this, even small missteps can be amplified, especially when your opponent is adept at exploiting those weaknesses.
Now, it's crucial to acknowledge that this wasn't just a vote against Harris. We also need to examine what Trump did right to secure this win.
Absolutely. While dissatisfaction with the current administration played a role, Trump was also very strategic in activating his base and tapping into the anxieties and desires of a significant portion of the electorate.
So let's dive into his strategy. What were the key elements that resonated with voters?
Well, he masterfully capitalized on those economic anxieties we discussed earlier, but he also strategically emphasized cultural issues that energized his base.
His America First messaging, for example.
Yeah.
That seems to have resonated deeply, especially compared to Harris, who, according to our sources, struggled to articulate a clear and compelling alternative vision for the nation.
Precisely. The ability to present a straightforward, emotionally resonant narrative can be incredibly persuasive, even if it oversimplifies complex realities.
It sounds like a combination of economic anxieties, a historic gender gap, and Trump's ability to capitalize on both. But there's another layer we need to explore: how these factors intersect with broader societal trends.
Exactly. To truly understand the magnitude of this upset, we must look beyond the immediate political factors and consider how they connect with deeper cultural and societal shifts.
All right, let's get philosophical then. What are these bigger trends you're talking about, and what do they tell us about the state of America today?
One striking theme that emerges from our sources is a sense of disillusionment and pessimism among a significant portion of the population. It's not just about economic hardship. It's a broader feeling of being left behind, of the system not working for them, of their voices going unheard.
That feeling of being ignored or even looked down upon by the so-called elites, right?
Exactly.
And Trump was able to tap into that resentment. With his populist rhetoric. It was like he was saying, I see you, I understand your frustrations, and I'm the only one who can fix it.
Exactly. And that message resonated with voters who felt alienated from the political establishment. Regardless of their specific economic circumstances, it tapped into a sense of identity, a longing for belonging, and a desire to feel like they have a stake in the future of the country.
So in a sense, this election wasn't just about Trump or Harris. It was about a deeper sense of unease and division within American society itself. And these divisions seem to be intensifying rather than fading away. Honestly, it's a bit worrisome.
It is concerning, and it raises profound questions about the future of American democracy. In a system that's become so polarized and fragmented. Effectively address the complex challenges facing the nation? Can we find common ground and build a more inclusive and equitable society amidst this division?
Those are big questions, and honestly, I don't have the answers. But what's clear from our deep dive is that this election wasn't just a blip on the radar. It reflects something much deeper and more complex about the state of American politics and culture today.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to move beyond superficial analysis and truly grapple with the underlying forces shaping our political landscape.
We can't just dismiss this as a fluke or blame it on a few bad campaign decisions. There are deeper issues at play here, and they demand our attention.
And these issues won't disappear overnight. They'll continue to shape political discourse and influence policy decisions for years to come.
So we've talked about the economic factors, the gender gap, the broader societal trends, but there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to consider: Trump himself.
Yes, the man who seemingly defies all political norms and expectations. What does his return to power after all that's happened? Tell us about the American electorate. That's a question that's been swirling in my mind since the results came in.
Same here. It's almost like he's become this larger-than-life figure, a symbol of something bigger than just himself. But what exactly does he symbolize? And why does he continue to hold such sway over a significant portion of the population?
Those are complex questions to unpack. But I think it's safe to say that his appeal goes beyond traditional political ideologies. He's tapped into something deeper, something emotional, something that speaks to people's fears, frustrations, and desires in a way that traditional politicians simply haven't been able to replicate.
It's like he's playing a different game entirely, with different rules, different strategies, and different objectives. And somehow he keeps winning.
He's undoubtedly rewritten the playbook on how to win in American politics. Whether you agree with him or not, you have to acknowledge his effectiveness as a political operator. He's a master of persuasion, a showman, and a relentless fighter who never gives up.
And that combination of traits, even if some find them distasteful or even dangerous, has proven to be incredibly potent in the current political climate. It's like he's a force of nature, and we're still trying to figure out how to deal with him.
I think that's a great analogy. He's like a hurricane that's ripped through the political landscape, leaving a trail of destruction and uncertainty in its wake. And we're still assessing the damage and trying to rebuild.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into the 2024 election. This shocking outcome raises so many questions about America's future.
Yeah.
Its values, its very identity.
It does. And I think the most important takeaway is that this isn't just a political story. It's a story about America itself. It's about who we are, what we believe in, and where we're headed as a nation. We've only scratched the surface, and there's much more to uncover.
So we just explored some pretty big ideas about the forces driving this election and what they say about America today. But there's another aspect we need to examine, what this means for the future of American democracy itself.
Oh, absolutely. It's a question that's weighing heavily on many minds, and for good reason. This election has exposed deep fault lines in American society, divisions based on race, gender, economic status, and political ideology. And those divisions are being fueled by a growing distrust of institutions, the spread of misinformation, and a sense that the political system is rigged against the average person.
So are we saying American democracy is in crisis?
Well,
that sounds pretty dramatic.
I wouldn't say it's a full-blown crisis yet,
Okay.
but there are definitely warning signs. Some of our sources point out that voter turnout was down this year, especially among younger voters.
Yeah.
This suggests a growing apathy and disillusionment with the political process.
Yeah, makes sense. If people don't believe their vote matters, they're less likely to participate. But that just weakens democracy further, right?
Exactly.
It's a vicious cycle.
Precisely. And it's not just about voter turnout. We're also seeing a rise in political polarization, with people retreating into their own echo chambers and demonizing those who hold opposing views.
Right.
This makes it incredibly difficult to find common ground, to compromise, to engage in constructive dialogue.
It does feel like we're living in two different realities sometimes.
Yeah.
It's hard to even talk about politics without it devolving into an argument.
And that inability to have civil discourse, to respect different viewpoints, that's a serious threat to a functioning democracy. Democracy thrives on debate, on the exchange of ideas, on the willingness to compromise and find solutions that benefit everyone. When we lose that ability, we're in dangerous territory.
So what can we do? Is there any way to reverse these trends and strengthen our democracy? It feels pretty overwhelming.
Well, it won't be easy, but there are steps we can take.
Okay.
First and foremost, we need to rebuild trust.
Okay.
Trust in our institutions, trust in the media, trust in each other. And that starts with each of us becoming more critical consumers of information.
Right.
Seeking out diverse perspectives and engaging in respectful dialogue.
We need to be more aware of our own biases, too. It's so easy to get caught up in the echo chambers of social media and news sources that just reinforce what we already believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to actively seek out information that challenges our assumptions and forces us to consider different viewpoints.
Right.
And we need to be willing to have those uncomfortable conversations with people who see the world differently than we do. It's not about converting people to our side, but about understanding each other.
That's a great point. It's not about winning an argument. It's about finding common ground and working together to solve problems.
Exactly. And that requires a shift in mindset from seeing politics as a zero-sum game to seeing it as a collaborative effort to improve the lives of all Americans.
So in a way, this election is a wake-up call. It's forcing us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our democracy.
Right.
But maybe that's what we need to start making real changes.
Perhaps. It's often in times of crisis that we're most open to change, to re-examining our assumptions, to forging new paths. This election has certainly shaken things up. And it remains to be seen whether it will lead to a strengthening or a weakening of our democratic institutions.
It's like we're at a crossroads.
Yes.
And the path we choose now will determine the course of our nation for years to come.
That's a powerful analogy. This election wasn't just about choosing a president. It's about choosing the kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a nation defined by division and distrust? Or do we want to be a nation that embraces unity, compassion, and a shared commitment to the common good?
That's a question each of us needs to answer, not just with our words, but with our actions.
Absolutely. The future of American democracy depends not on politicians or pundits, but on everyday citizens like you and me. It's up to us to decide what kind of nation we want to leave for future generations. And that's a responsibility we shouldn't take lightly.
It feels like a lot of pressure, but also a real opportunity to make a difference.
Exactly. This is our moment to step up, to engage in the hard work of rebuilding trust, bridging divides, and reaffirming our commitment to the principles that make America great.
Okay, I'm feeling a little fired up now.
Yeah.
This conversation has been intense, but also incredibly thought-provoking. It's clear that we're living through a pivotal moment in American history.
We are. And it's up to each of us to determine whether this moment will be remembered as a turning point towards a more perfect union,
right,
or a step backward into division and dysfunction.
So, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to walk away with from this deep dive?
I think the most important takeaway is that the health of our democracy depends on each and every one of us.
Yeah.
It's not something that happens automatically or that we can take for granted.
Right.
It requires active participation, critical thinking, and a commitment to the principles of fairness, equality, and respect for all.
We can't just sit on the sidelines and expect someone else to fix things.
Right.
We need to roll up our sleeves and get involved.
Well said. And perhaps most importantly, we need to remember that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires us to be active participants,
right,
to engage in the difficult conversations, to challenge injustice, and to work tirelessly towards creating a more perfect union.
That's a powerful message to end on. So to our listeners out there, I hope this deep dive has sparked some reflection, some critical thinking, and perhaps even a renewed sense of responsibility for the future of our democracy, because the future isn't predetermined.
Right.
It's something we create together, one choice, one conversation, one action at a time.
And remember, even in the face of daunting challenges, we can choose hope over despair. We can choose unity over division.
Right.
And we can choose to believe in the enduring power of democracy to create a more just and equitable world.
And on that note, we've explored the impact of this election on American democracy, but we're not done yet. There's one final and perhaps the most unsettling aspect we need to consider. What does this outcome mean for the future of American power and influence on the global stage? Stay tuned for our final segment where we'll tackle that very question. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been dissecting the factors behind Trump's surprise victory over Kamala Harris, and now we're turning our attention outward. What does this election result mean for America's place on the world stage? How will this impact America's global power and influence?
Well, those are questions that have policymakers and analysts around the world buzzing, and rightfully so. The U.S. has held a unique position of global leadership for decades.
Right.
But this election signals a potential shift in that dynamic.
Our sources suggest this shift could be pretty significant. Some argue that a Trump presidency, particularly after his previous term, could lead to further retrenchment from global affairs. They point to his America First rhetoric and his skepticism of international institutions like NATO and the UN.
That's a key point. Trump's foreign policy approach has historically been characterized by a strong emphasis on unilateral action, transactional diplomacy, and a willingness to challenge long-standing alliances. His return to the White House could signal a return to these policies, potentially creating friction with traditional allies and emboldening rivals like China and Russia.
So a more isolationist America. But how would that play out in practical terms? What specific impacts should we be watching for?
Well, for starters, we could see a continued weakening of those alliances you mentioned.
Okay.
Trump has been critical of NATO members for not contributing enough to defense spending.
Right.
And he's shown a willingness to pull back U.S. troops from overseas commitments. This could create uncertainty and instability in regions like Europe and the Middle East, where U.S. security guarantees have long been a cornerstone of stability.
That sounds like a recipe for chaos. And what about the economic implications? Trump has always been a big proponent of protectionist trade policies, right?
Absolutely. He's imposed tariffs on goods from China and other trading partners in the past, which has led to trade wars and economic uncertainty. A return to these policies could disrupt global trade flows and potentially harm the U.S. economy in the long run.
So potentially a less engaged America on the global stage, a weaker network of alliances, and a risk of economic turmoil. Those are some pretty serious implications. But some argue that Trump's approach could actually have positive effects, right?
Yes. There are those who believe that Trump's unconventional style and willingness to challenge the status quo could lead to some positive outcomes.
Okay.
They argue that his focus on bilateral deals and America First policies could lead to more favorable trade agreements for the U.S.
Right.
They also point to his efforts to broker peace deals in the Middle East, suggesting he may be able to achieve breakthroughs where traditional diplomacy has failed.
So a mixed bag then. It seems like there's a lot of uncertainty about what a Trump presidency will actually mean for America's global standing.
Exactly. There are potential risks and potential opportunities. Ultimately, the impact of Trump's foreign policy will depend on a complex interplay of factors, including his own actions, the reactions of other countries, and the evolving global landscape.
Yeah.
What we can say with certainty is that the world is watching closely, and the stakes are high.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the 2024 election, what's the main takeaway for our listeners? What should they be thinking about as we move forward into this new and uncertain era?
I think the key takeaway is that this election marks a pivotal moment, not just for American politics, but for America's place in the world. The decisions made by the Trump administration in the coming years will have profound consequences for global stability, economic prosperity, and the future of democratic values. It's crucial for all of us as engaged citizens to stay informed, think critically, and hold our leaders accountable for the choices they make on the world stage.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thank you for guiding us through this complex and fascinating deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery. We hope this deep dive has provided you with valuable insights and sparked some important conversations. Remember, in a world that's constantly changing, the quest for knowledge and understanding never ends. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.